Hello everybody, my name is Maria Palazzolo. I'm the CEO of GS1 Australia. I'd like to officially welcome everyone that's on this call today. Thank you for joining this NGTAG Open Industry event. We hope that you'll be very pleased with what you hear today and hopefully learn lots of things. Before we go any further, I'd like to do the acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters across Australia. I just want to officially welcome everybody again, and I'm quite excited about this event today and what we're going to hear. As you know, the objective of today is to learn more about the very specific topics of the EU Green and to impact all organisations who are exporting into Europe. Now, one might think that the ambition to gather data about a product and its entire supply chain journey and actually to share that information across the entire value chain, including the consumers, might seem a little bit ambitious. The fact that consumers today actually really want to know a lot more about the products that they purchase, and they want to know very specifically the environmental impact that the products that they purchase have. You might say, well, it's rather futuristic to think about that we can actually gather this information and have this complete traceability of a product throughout its value chain. But the reality is it's not futuristic. It's actually possible, and it's actually possible today. And so we talk about this in the concept of a circularity conversation. And GS1 has been having this conversation with governments and regulators for, in fact, a very long time. So it's very exciting to see the progress that has been made in Europe and to witness policymakers actually taking a leadership position on the subjects of sustainability and circularity. So it's been said, as I've read some documents, of the EU Green Deal and the Digital Product Passport, which is designed, by the way, by the EU regulators, has the potential to change the way the economy operates and will have a substantial impact to global trade. And if this is indeed the case, as we suspect it is, and it will be, this impact needs to be carefully managed and coordinated. And it's the role of GS1 to work with industries, governments and regulators to help them navigate this rather complex journey that everyone will ultimately embark on. So it's a commitment from GS1, and not only GS1 Australia, but GS1 across the world, to support governments and industries to actually get this work done, because it needs to be done. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Patrick Johannesson from GS1 Global. And Patrick's going to present our speakers and also give us a bit of a blurb about what today's going to be all about from his perspective. Once again, before I leave you, thank you very much for all the speakers that have agreed to speak today. Very much looking forward to hear what you have to say and for giving of your time so generously. So thank you. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Maria, and hello, everyone. So my name is Patrick, and I'm a Senior Director for Asia Pacific Public Policy, and I'm also the Senior Director for Retail at GS1 globally. Today, sustainability and circular economy trends are visible across industries and supply chains. And we will pick up some of the key points just introduced by Maria. We will try to explore how new regulatory developments happening 10,000 miles away in Brussels potentially are impacting businesses in Australia and in other exporting economies. With this webinar, we're trying to give you a clear overview of the EU Green Deal and how it will impact exports to Europe. We will try to clarify some issues, such as what is the EU Green Deal? What are digital product passports? When do the digital product passport come into effect? How will they impact Australian exporters? What can we do to be prepared? So in this session, we've also invited two peak industry bodies from Australia the Export Council of Australia and the European Australian Business Council to the panel. What we're trying to do is to describe the context that companies are operating in and then identify where future needs for industry collaboration may be needed. We also have GS1's leading expert on EU policy with us today, live from Amsterdam, and she will help us to better understand these regulatory developments. So the regular digital housekeeping, please be present and avoid multitasking. Please stay on mute if you're not speaking. Please use the chat for the Q&As. So on behalf of the team here at GS1, I'm happy to welcome you to today's NGTAG meeting, where we're aiming to help facilitate collaboration and dialogue and to share information. I hope you'll enjoy this session, and I would like to jump right in and introduce the speakers. So today we have Francesca Poggiali, who is the Chief Policy Officer for Europe at GS1. We have Diane Tipping, who is the Chair of the Export Council of Australia. And we have Jason Collins, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian European Business Council and Chair of European Business Organizations Worldwide Network. So with that, I will hand over to the panelists. If you would just like to introduce yourself and your organization briefly, and then we can get going with the first presentation by Francesca. So if we start with Diane, please.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. My name's Diane Tipping. I'm the chair of the Export Council of Australia. But one of the things I'm very proud of is I'm an actual exporter. So I feel that I bring to the Export Council, where I have been involved for a very long time, a lot of the procedures and technical knowledge. I don't know if knowledge is always the right word, but the technical know-how about how an export works, particularly from Australia. Hopefully I know how it works from many countries, but I would like very much to impart some of that information with you today. And as we go through the program, hopefully there'll be some insights that are from an exporter's perspective and not just about regulation, but what we want to happen and what we would like to have happen and how we will cope with what has to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And Jason?
Well, thanks very much to Patrick and all of your colleagues for bringing us together for this important session this afternoon. Jason Collins is my name. I'm the Chief Executive of the European Australian Business Council. And as the name suggests, our mission is to bring all the different actors together to talk between private and public sector on how we improve and I guess facilitate all the opportunities for increased trade and investment between Australia and Europe as a whole. Europe is in many respects the #1 economic partner for Australia, because if you combine both the trade flows with the huge amount of investment that is embedded in both economies, then the volumes are really quite enormous. But much of this agenda in terms of what is happening at the moment, a free trade agreement under negotiation between Australia and the EU, is in many ways, as important as it is, it's looking backwards. It's trying to fix the things that we already had in place that made it difficult to get trade and investment done. What we're talking about today is the sort of regulatory issues, which is about how we conduct our business in the future. And so the discussions that I think we're having are an important part of those conversations that really need to be had about setting the rules about how products and services are regulated into the future. So I'm delighted to be part of the discussion today.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Francesca, you want to say a few words about GS1 operations in Europe?
At first, I want to thank you. I'm really humbled by this opportunity today, and I cannot say how happy I am to be with you. So I will explain a little bit, if I may, from a European perspective, what is happening and the intention of what we really hear from Brussels, which are the intentions of this new mandatory data structure, which is the digital product passport that the European Union is leading, and also a little bit about the impact on our community. So, and it would be really a pleasure to share some slides and to go through the program a little bit. But then we will hear directly from the European Commission about this new mandatory data structure and the goals that they want to reach with it. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Francesca. So we will now ask Francesca to jump into her slides to set the stage of what is happening in Europe with the European Green Deal, with the digital product passport. So Francesca, over to you. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. So at first, allow me to say a few words on the why. Why is the European Union now issuing this new mandatory legislation containing the concept of the digital product passport? Well, the main goal is to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050. This is not only applicable to Europe. Other regions of the world, other countries which have ratified the Paris Agreement have the same goal, to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. In order to do so, there are also specific goals that need to be reached by 2030. So the digital product passport should be seen into this larger context. Actually, this is a tool to enable both circularity and digitalization at once. Europe has always seen the gap between the digitalization of the region towards the goals already achieved by other regions of the world in terms of digitalization. And so they thought about matching the two ambitious goals that they have according to the towards neutrality, carbon neutrality, and the digital initiatives of the Union. They decided to match them and develop this new mandatory data structure, which is the digital product passport. It's very important that we connect both pillars, because otherwise it will be very difficult to understand the why the European Union is doing this. So behind the carbon neutrality, there is this new concept, this new business model, which is very well described as the donut economy. So you may call it the circular economy business model. You may call it in many different ways. Years ago, the word sustainability was really on the desk of the EU civil servants. Recently, after this book was published and after many things have happened, also from a legislative standpoint, I think I can say that the European Union has embraced this concept of the circular economy, and that this is again on the why, what is behind the digital product passport. So I hear the European officials every day saying that they are transitioning from the linear economy to the circular economy business model, which means, in very simply words, to keep the resources inside the loop and to reduce waste at the minimum. But there is another sentence that they often use that I really like. They say that the circular economy should enable that sustainable products become the normality in Europe, right? So among all the goals that need to be reached by 2050 and 2030, there is also the goal that only circular products may be put on the market, may be put on the European market by 2050. So I hope I'm giving you the flavor of why the two pillars are connected. So of course, waste reduction is an important step into this, but not the only one, right? Because as I said, all those acts that you see on the screen, which briefly summarize the main initiative that the European Union has developed, well, all those acts were preparing the ground, the legislative ground for the Sustainable Product Act to be presented. So, and this is what we are going to focus a little bit more today, really how the Green Deal is being enabled by the Sustainable Product Act. That act has been really published on the 30th of March this year, so it's already an official proposal of the European Commission. It was presented, and it was really, from a European perspective, really welcomed by companies, by small and medium companies as well, by associations, by trade associations, by consumer organizations. So in Europe, there are really positive voices regarding this new act, especially because there is a consciousness, as you see on the screen now, that 80% of what is happening, 80% really of products' environmental impacts are determined at the design phase. So the European economy actors are conscious that they need also to redesign products and embed the circularity model since the beginning, since the design phase. So the DPP is one of the last, let's say, mandatory act that the European Union has been introduced, and it is really included in this larger view and of all the other pieces of legislation that I mentioned before that you've seen on the screen. I want to share my last slide for this introduction on an interesting report that Deloitte published, which describes 3 different scenarios on how the European Union could really embed the circular economy business plan into the digital product passport. The acronym you will hear today is DPP. So how the digital product passport is going really to meet and enable circularity and digitalization in Europe, according to three different scenarios. Well, the main conclusion of this study is the fact that it makes a tremendous difference for the economy in Europe if global open standards are used in order to develop the digital product passport. The difference is really significant. You will, if you read the report, you will see that there are those 3 different scenarios. But if global standards are used in order to develop the digital product passport in Europe, well, the difference is like the entire economy of one of the member states of the European Union, which is Malta. So it will be 0.1% of the EU GDP. So, and so this is what is at stake, really. It's very important that the European officials hear our voice, the voice of standardization bodies, the voice of Australian partners as well, because they are now taking those important decisions on how really to make this a reality, on how the digital product passport from a design in a legislation can really become a reality and be developed by companies. So with this brief introduction, I give it back to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for the introduction to the topic at hand. With that, I'll jump into the panelists with some questions. Jason, if I may start with you. Jason, how would you describe the current level of awareness of the EU Green Deal and the digital product passports and its implications on companies that you're working with, on Australian exporters and other businesses?
Thanks very much, Patrick. I think it's fair to say that there are 2 things. One is that when it comes to the complex nature of what we've just heard from Francesca, there is an enormous amount of detail which is simply not understood at all by companies. There are some elements of the package, for example, carbon border adjustment mechanism, those things which have been in the press and covered by the media. But in terms of a deep understanding of what their implications are and so forth, they're not there. So put that in one side. On the other side, I think everyone in the economy is aware of the enormous pressures that exist now, but are also coming in terms of expectations by governments, by consumers, by investors, by everyone about what is it that they're selling, whether it be a good or a service, what is the provenance of it, what is the environmental impact of it, what are the supply chain issues potentially attached to it. So I think everyone knows that there's been a fundamental shift and that we're on a new journey in terms of the way that we act within the economy. But when it comes to the technical details of Green Deal and how it'll be implemented, then I think everyone's, will be certainly not aware of those details.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Diane, if I can jump over to you. Do you agree with Jason? Do we need to communicate more around this? And what's the Export Council doing to raise awareness on these and related issues?
A couple of questions there. I do agree totally with Jason. We've had a year in 2021 where Australia was very much under pressure to try and get to the ideal climate and change number at the end of 2050 or at the end of 2030 even, and we all worried a great deal about CBAM and the different implications that would have on Australian exports into the EU. We have a change of government, and that topic has sort of not gone away. It has definitely not gone away, but it's a little bit more relieved, or the pressure is not as high as it was probably last year. There's a lot more push towards meeting our goals and trying to meet the goals in time. So I think there's a lot of people that have not forgotten about the need to do this, but have not probably put it on the top of their list right at the moment to consider that that's something they need to think about. So from an everyday export perspective, there's a lot, and agreeing with Jason, I don't think there's enough consideration or not enough at the top level going into all of this. And when I say top level, I don't mean the very large companies. They're very much ahead of the game in all of this, but the everyday businesses, both in Australia and the international arena that export, that think about this as a priority. Now, taking that into account, there are many, many businesses doing wonderful things in this field, doing wonderful things in the ESG area, and taking that step. We are all doing that in Australia. Most people are doing it, regardless of what's in the news or not in the news. So from our perspective at the Export Council, we're very much involved in things like, just today, Traceability Summit was on with Department of Agriculture, very much involved in that. We were a guest speaker. We've been on a number of summit level activities there, very much wanting our exporters to consider this. Now, traceability is not just for farmers, it's for everyone in the supply chain. We're looking very much at sustainability and very much at the ESG understanding by our exporters. So to be quite brief here, this is something that is not going to go away. It is something we need to push further, and we are wanting to do that. The EU green economy deal is very much a regulatory. So they use the word taxonomy, and I don't think I had to actually look up exactly what that meant. And it means a scheme of classification. So it's going to be about classification and regulatory requirements that we as Australian exporters need to meet. Now, we can do that, and we have a lot of things happening within Australia that will help us to do that. And we can talk about that as we go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and also the benefit with an agreed taxonomy is that you call things the same things in different geographies, so you know what you're measuring, and you're measuring it in the same way.
Yeah.
Francesca, if I can jump over to you, if you have any comments of what you heard from the panelists so far.
Yes, indeed, Patrick, thank you. At first, I would like to clarify the scope of this new piece of legislation. So all products that are put on the market at European level will need to carry a digital product passport, with the exception of food, feed, and medicinal products. The reasons why those three sectors are excluded is not that they are not going to embrace circularity and digitalization. It's because they already have vertical legislations which are very, let's say, heavy on the industry, and especially if you consider the geopolitical situation that we are living, and which is, terrible, and also the post-COVID transition that we are also facing. So those three sectors are, for the time being, officially excluded from the scope. But I tell you, for them, it's just a question of putting all the other pieces of legislation that they have, and at the end of the process, in 10 years, they will get something like the digital product passport as well, probably with a different name, right? They are considered even more advanced compared to the other sectors that will immediately receive, let's say, specific legislation on how to embed the digital product passport. So the first sectors that the European Union, and you will hear from them directly in a moment, the first sectors that are included are textiles everywhere. So it means apparel, footwear, garment, furniture as well, right? So, but also electric and electronics products, especially consumer goods. So just 3 weeks ago, the European Union has already tabled an eco-design legislation for smartphone and tablets. So the intention is to divide entire sectors into categories of products with specific eco-design legislation where they will embed the digital product passport vision. So for the next 10 years, we are going to face something like between 18 and 20 new acts where the eco-design principles will be embedded for specific sectors. So we, the GS1 community, is there to support you and to support our membership and the investments that companies have already been doing in this. And I'm sure there will be other opportunities where we can go deeper into the impact on your exports towards Europe, because let me repeat it, this legislation is going to impact all imports into the European market. So the way you will develop your products and the way you're going to export products into Europe is going to be affected, because basically the digital product passport is going to be there. In some cases, the regulations are speaking about having data carriers directly engraved onto the product so that the carrier stays, and so that there is a way to have access from the product directly to the digital product passport, like for electrical vehicles batteries. So for those of you who work in this area, you may have an interest in reading the new European legislation applicable to that sector. And probably for other sectors, the digital product passport will need to be carried in different ways, and this is where the GS1 community can help. For sure, standards are available and can support this new mandatory data structure. So it's important that your communities are alerted. So this is why I really welcome this opportunity today to speak with you directly. Thank you, Patrick.
And Francesca, I'm sure that even though you've explained it all very well, I'm sure we have some companies that are thinking, not only in Australia, but in other economies around the world, that this is just a long-term plan or a pipe dream for the EU. We don't really have to care about this now. What is your kind of simple message to these companies?
Well, this regulation is now being discussed at the European Parliament. So in the next 15 months, we're going to see what we call a ping pong between the European institutions, the European Commission, European Parliament, and European Council, but it will be published in spring 2024 on the official journal of the European Union. And this is where it is going to produce legal effects immediately. So there are deadlines, specific deadlines that are going to be applicable depending on the sectors that we are considering, right? So as I said, it's a plan of the next 10 years, but for instance, in our dialogue with the battery sector, Patrick, they are telling us that in order to market an electrical vehicle's battery, that industry needs 3 years, which means that if they need to have a product passport available by 2026, because this is the deadline that is included in the regulation, well, they are now today producing the batteries that will need to be on the market on 2026. So it looks like we have time, but frankly, by speaking with industry, we realize that time is really limited and they need to do investments because, as I said, they need to embed circularity into the digital product passport. It is not just a new digital mandatory data structure. It is meant to embed circularity. So for instance, it should be a means to transmit CO2 emissions data attributes which is something new also for our community at GS1. So it's not just master data, as we may call it in the GS1 language and in the data world. It's also event data, traceability data, all these embedded into the product passport and being available for consumers and for all operators around the circular supply chain through a data carrier, which of course should be a 2D data carrier. It cannot be the linear barcode to carry all this information. Of course, the 2D will enable this. So this is in a nutshell what we're going to face.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francesca. If I jump back to Jason and Diane, and maybe this is a question more related to local Australian political environment. So is there a sense now that you have a new government in place that's focused on sustainability and aggressive emissions targets, that industry doesn't have to do anything? Are they complacent, thinking that, you know, all work is done already locally here? We don't really have to think about what's happening in EU and other places.
I wouldn't suggest that at all, Patrick. I think Australian businesses and Australian exporters are very aware of the international arena. I mean, what this green economy deal and the passport coming from that, and the other activities or the other regulations, as Patricia said, the agri area, farm to fork strategy and so forth, all the different regulations very much play a mind on Australian businesses and exporters. And we need to consider that there are 13 different measures in this green economy process, and they include mechanisms that extend to the current emissions in international shipping, the circular economy legislation, enforcing deforestation-free supply chains, and traditional funding assistance. So any business in Australia that does business in the EU will be affected by this, regardless of whether, you know, they are food or any of the ones that are not involved in that at the moment. If there's anything that someone is selling a product, any company that anyone is selling a product to in the EU that has any involvement in those areas or anything to do with the rules, the 13 different measures, they're going to be affected from Australia. They're going to be affected also on the import side of things. So this is something everyone is aware of. They're just not aware of the detail. That's the issue at the moment.
Yeah, Jason?
Well, Patrick, I very much completely in agreement on that. A couple of points. It's not just about the products that are being sold as well, because this is a whole of economy thing, which I think is the most important thing for people to understand, both in Europe, of course, but also from those of us outside of Europe. It's not just a sustainability package. It's actually an economic transformation package. Its scope is really big. So in the example of imports and exports, as Diane was mentioning, but it's also going to come from investors as well. So if you've got an Australian company that may not be selling things to Europe, but you've got, I don't know, let's say 40% of your investment is from European institutions, they're going to be asking these hard questions. Well, what is the environmental performance of the business? And you know, a company turning around and saying, oh, well, we don't know, you know, what integrity we have in our supply chain. We don't know what our suppliers' credentials when it comes to, you know, labor and safety and environmental performance and so on. We have no idea. We just buy stuff from them. That won't work anymore. And so I think there's an acknowledgement of that. And one thing is important to note, particularly for European friends, is that for a lot of Australian companies and businesses, they've already down this path. They've already on this journey. And interesting that it was mentioned about food not being included in the Digital Pass initiative. It's just interesting to reflect that in Australian agriculture, and I think, Diane, you mentioned it, alluded to it before, they're actually very well down the path of traceability because they know it's actually a consumer demand a factor, and it's actually that provides product differentiation for Australian producers if they're able to say, well, we know where this this product was produced and what the quality and the conditions and so on and so forth. So it's just last point perhaps is that whilst Yes, undeniably, it's positive. Of course, it is that the federal government now is a sort of willing participant in ambitious action on climate change and everything to do with it. Firstly, business was already down that, on that journey, was miles ahead of government, frankly, on this. But secondly, having the ambition is of course the starting point. Achieving the results is a second, but thirdly, it's the international cooperation. Because if Europe is doing certain things, Australia, other jurisdictions are doing things, and we end up with systems where we can't recognise, well, if an Australian producer is doing things to reduce emissions, but that can't be certified in a way that will be recognised by other jurisdictions, then we'll end up with a regulatory mess that will actually be bad for everybody. So it's really important that all of these three things are being tackled at the same time.
You totally agree, Jason. And what will happen in Europe, or what is going to happen in Europe, will happen elsewhere, will happen all around the world in some form of timeline. So, we need to get it right from Australia's perspective. And I think you're quite right. We're not halfway, we're already on the track to that. So it's just a matter of getting the right rules from what needs to be done, having that harmonisation and the compliance put in place that works everywhere. I'll talk very quickly about the simplified trade system. Australia has taken an initiative to have a simplified trade system developed. It is early stages. There's a lot of work being done, and very much the comments coming from the task force that are managing that are that they want to be ahead of the game. They want to be able to give the right classifications, the right harmonisation with everyone in the world, not just a particular country. They don't want to just copy rules and regulations. They want to be ahead of the game and actually set a lot of the rules and regulations. So the idea is that Australia puts a lot of time and energy and research into what other countries are doing and are ahead of the game when this new program comes into play.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Building on that point, and also building on what you just said, Jason, and I'm going to make it a little bit like a two-pronged question here. Are you familiar with ongoing discussions or collaboration between Australian government and the European Commission on these issues specifically? And related to that, I know you're going to Brussels later this year for your global meeting there. Is this an issue that you and the industry groups that you represent will discuss in meetings with members of Parliament and European Commission officials?
Absolutely. In fact, I can't think of a single meeting where sustainability-related issues will not be part of those discussions. So whether it be a discussion on trade agreements, whether it be a discussion on investment, whether it be, because as I was saying before, this is a sort of whole of economy change rather than just, as I said, a sort of environmental package, the way things like that used to be thought of. So whether it comes to discussions indeed on science, research and innovation, because really a lot of the solutions to achieve the ambition that have been set down are going to be driven by technology as well. So I think, so to answer your question, absolutely, it'll be part of every discussion, how we, how all of these different levers are going to play their role in achieving the transition.
And do you foresee any of these new requirements from EU to be written into in some way in the new Australia-EU trade agreement, or referenced indirectly in any way, or how do you foresee that evolving?
Look, an important part of the agreement will be what's known to those who follow trade agreements and trade policy, particularly on the European side, is the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter. And that will go into a number of things. I mean, it will refer to shared commitments that have been made internationally on emissions reductions. And it will go through, I guess, in terms of principles about how both partners are committed to achieving the sort of decarbonisation, but also biodiversity and many other things. It is a kind of pervasive topic. For example, we recently hosted a delegation of the International Trade Committee of the Parliament, an enormously important group because they sign off on any trade deals at the end of the day. And every one of the questions raised by the MEPs in that group was on trade, but there was a sustainability dimension to the question, it'll very much feature. What we do need to make sure is that agreements don't get bogged down into becoming agreements on anything, on everything and trade tacked on at the end. Essentially, we're trying to liberalize. It's not about reducing standards, though. That's really important to make. What we want to do is not a race to the bottom, but actually achieve very high levels of standards, which ultimately at the end consumers, investors, and everybody expect. So it's about optimizing those things, which I think we can do through this current negotiation.
Thanks, Jason. That's very helpful. We have a question from Francesca, again coming from the audience. Francesca, are you aware of any resources available in the EU or elsewhere to support industry in these priority sectors to learn more and give them like a roadmap how they can adjust?
Yes, I like this question very much because at a certain point when you really get onto the how, so how are you going to make this possible? Of course, you see all the challenges that the industry needs to face. And so you kind of ask, is there something I should do? Is there a framework where I should be participating in so that and yes, indeed. So for instance, just me give an example. During this year, the European Commission published several calls for proposals for industry. And in some cases, they were open to international companies, of course, to get support and join forces into what they call consortium agreements. So different stakeholders around the same table. And GS1 has been participating in one of those, for instance, and we won a tender. And so I'm glad to share with you today that we are a member of a consortium, so a group of stakeholders that is going to develop 3 roadmaps, prototypes, that's the word that is used in that agreement, for the digital product passport in 3 different sectors. One is for the electrical vehicles, batteries, the other one is for electric and electronics, and another one is for the textile sector. So this is called CIRPAS, and I'm glad to share more information if you are interested. And I want to join Diane's point regarding the taxonomy, because part of what this group is going to do is also to show the gaps between the taxonomy that today is already existing and what the taxonomy should look like very soon in the future in order to be able to develop the digital product passport for all the sectors included. So we at GS1, we are conscious that there are taxonomy gaps today. And this is why also GS1 published some papers at this regard with other standardization bodies. And finally, we will have this opportunity. So this is not just an isolated initiative. The call for tender that I just mentioned, there are others. I'm sure you constantly look at them, and some of them are really still open now until the end of the year. So we encourage also our membership to have a look and participate. And in the framework of CIRPAS, of this new consortium that I'm speaking about, which was actually kicked off on the 1st of October, this is really new, and we have only 15 months to develop the semantic gaps and the 3 prototypes. So we just have 15 months to do it. Well, when we kicked this off on the 1st of October, the European Commission told us that they're already thinking about opening another call next year to really embed digitalization and circularity around the same data structure. So there are plenty of initiatives. plenty of funding opportunities also that the European Commission is opening. It's more, the challenge is more to select the right ones, to select the ones that really make sense for from a specific sector perspective or a company perspective, and to be sure that industry puts its energy and resources where it really makes sense. So, but in total, there are 3 trillion available from the European Union, which include the post-COVID transition, because the post-COVID is also a green transition. So I agree with Jason when he said that it's never now, again, only an issue of circularity per se. In Europe, somehow it is given for granted. It's how you embed circularity and digitalization. How you embed circularity, digitalization, and safety. So that's the future we're going to face from a European perspective, right? And data is just a tool, an instrument. In all this, product data is really valuable because this is the basis that is going to enable this transition for companies. So for those of you who are more interested in SIRPAS, I'm going to put a link in the chat so that you may see the details.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Do we expect that other countries will adopt similar measures? If so, what countries would you expect? I mean, outside of Australia, obviously, what countries would you expect, and maybe what regions would move faster? What are you hearing anything when you talk to colleagues from other countries?
I'll just quickly mention what I believe. I have not heard, and this probably goes back to the initial discussion we had, that there isn't a lot of talk at the moment about these things. Australian businesses, I mentioned this before, Australian businesses and Australian exporters are very innovative, and they're moving along the right path to do these things. But we're not hearing a lot, because I think we're quite aware that the government, the new government, has moved in a different direction to the past government in speeding things up. So I don't think the discussion is quite as frantic as it was last year. But last year, and not a lot this year, I'm hearing, and not a lot this year, but last year there was a lot of conversation about the US going down the CBAM path, which meant that you know, all of the things that the EU brought in would be part of that CBAM. They'd have to be to make it work. What the EU was putting in place will have to work internationally. It can't just be one block of, you know, countries in a block area doing something and no one else is doing it. So, and the idea of international trade is about harmonization. This is what we're promoting. I think everyone in trade is promoting that. It's about harmonization. It might be a slower process, but everyone is still working towards that 2050 goal as well. Okay, whether they make the 2030 is another thing. So, but we're all working towards 2050, and I think the results of the weather over the last couple of 2 years or year or so, particularly in Australia, have been very much pushing us towards thinking about this even more. So look, I'm not hearing a lot, but I do know last year, and the US is going through a lot of other issues at the moment, but everyone still has this on their mind. Yes, they were talking about it, perhaps not quite as deeply as the EU has gone into it, but you know, we all have to do it. We don't have a choice, really, at the end of the day. Yeah,
thanks. Jason, what are you hearing from your colleagues among the European chambers in the EBO network and other colleagues that you're working with on policy issues?
Sure, just a couple of comments. I just echo what Diana's just said, but a couple of other observations. One is that first of all, you know, the geopolitical nature of what has changed fundamentally with the war in Ukraine, with you know, worries about supply chains and all of the rest of the issues that are associated with that has sort of meant, I think, in some jurisdictions, a sort of not necessarily less work, but less sort of public profile, if you like, around the agenda. It would be a mistake. I don't think it is a mistake, but it would be a mistake if anyone was to think that this would mean in some way that Europe is going to be totally consumed by an energy crisis and take its foot off the pedal when it comes to the sustainability agenda, the Green Deal. Nothing could be further from the truth. The economic recovery package from COVID, indeed the whole energy crisis is all looking to more investment in renewables, more investment in sources of energy, but in all the other things that we've talked about. So, doing that economic transformation. The EU has great institutional capacity to manage a range of complex issues at the same time. Probably better at doing it than anyone else is, because national governments sort of big issues crop up, and then that takes all the energy and focus. I'm generalizing a great deal. What I'm saying is that the EU is quite unique, I think, in the way that it is set up to be able to manage a whole range of quite complex issues at the same time. So I don't think we'll see any slackening off in terms of the ambition. There might be changes in terms of scope, there might be changes in terms of timelines, and other things, but fundamentally we know the EU is heading in this direction very strongly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate your thoughts on that. I'd just like to hear from our panelists, from Jason and Diane, your last kind of thoughts on this, trying to maybe wrap up everything that you've heard today. Jason, if you want to go first.
Thanks. I just think to everybody, certainly from myself, speaking for myself, I'm sure it'd be the similar case for everyone, just how closely we need to be seeing how these issues evolve, because I think from our last speaker, we've just got a glimpse of the implications that will be for different industrial sectors, but also for everyone involved in in the supply chains that we're talking about. I mean, there's a high degree of ambition, but I think the sort of transparency and the accountability mechanisms that sort of will effectively be embedded through this mechanism don't need to be something that we need to be worried about in terms of just looking at the cost, complexity, and so on. But what we do need is an efficient way of getting to the destination. So that's where we all come in terms of having these discussions with Almut and keeping in contact with your colleagues so that you have the best feedback from industry and so on, and also that our constituency are aware of what's coming. Look forward to further discussions. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jason. Diane, any last thoughts?
Yeah, just two things. I just want to thank everyone, especially Almut, for her presentation today. I think there's a lot to take in, but we're all ready to do that. I'm sure Australian businesses and Australian exporters, as I said, are really willing to go forward with this. There's some benefits, and this is the second thing I wanted to just mention. There's a lot of benefits in going down this pathway, whether we feel it's cost effective or not. Just put that aside for the moment and think about the sustainability that you will build in your business. The to address product liability challenges more broadly, you'll be able to have transparency, traceability, and consistency for every part of the value chain. You'll be able to think about and initiate positive thinking, innovative thinking in new practices. It'll be an enabler for the development of completely new business models for a lot of businesses. So there's a lot of good things in this. It's a lot of work, a lot of continued work, but we need to do it, and we have no choice if we want to export not just to the EU, but eventually around the world, and eventually all products. So please learn more as time goes on, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. I recognize that we have 4 questions in the Q&A that we did not address. We will follow up on these over email. I apologize for that. With that, I would like to thank all our speakers and panelists, Diane, Jason, and Francesca, for making this an informative and entertaining session. I would also like to thank Maria and the GS1 Australia team for hosting this session. And with that, we close the meeting. Thank you very much.